Shout out to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Hey guys, Spirit of the Law here. You might want to hide your archers for this one, as in this video we're going to be looking at the Goth unique unit, the Huskarl. While its ability to absolutely carry you to victory over archer civs and its lightning fast creation time are well known, we're going to go a little deeper in this video and see how it holds up in different melee situations to get a more complete picture of the unit. We'll start things off in the Castle Age. Now right away, we have to remember that all Goth infantry is heavily discounted at 30% in Castle and 35% in Imperial. Goths don't have supplies, but with the discount included, Huskarl is still 50% more costly in terms of resources than the Long Swordsman. At a glance, their stats are actually pretty close, with the same HP, a difference of just 1 attack and melee armor, with the Huskarl's pierce armor then being the most obvious advantage, though worth pointing out as well is it's about 16% faster. It's not the fastest infantry by any means, but outpaces the Spearline for example, and is neck and neck with the Berserk. That speed and armor combination of course make Huskarls very dangerous against archers, but another contributing factor is they have significant anti-archer bonus damage thrown in as well. Other hidden bonuses include a small bonus against eagles and a decent amount of extra attack against buildings, helped out by a Goth infantry bonus and arson for another +1 if you need it. They aren't quite as good as the swordsman line against eagles, but against buildings are among the most effective infantry, right away suggesting there's more than just an anti-archer aspect to the unit. Another example of that is how broad their anti-archer specialty actually is and goes far beyond just foot archers. Many things you wouldn't think of as archers, like for example camel riders, hand cannons, elephant archers, arambi, and war wagons, all take that anti-archer bonus damage, and one-on-one all of these units lose to Huskarls in Castle Age without micro, despite costing significantly more. The other well-known aspect of the unit is of course its legendary creation speed, though it doesn't start out looking very special. They're actually created at a castle slower than many other infantry unique units, though with their Castle Age unique tech, Huskarls can then be trained at the barracks. Not only does that let you mass them from a much cheaper building than a castle, but even lets your team bonus kick in, reducing their training time by a few seconds. We'll talk about how crazy the stacking modifiers can get in Imperial Age on the barracks a bit later, but the barracks option alone makes them among the easiest unique units to mass. Next though, let's talk about what you can actually expect out of the unit once you've made them. To put their pierce armor into perspective, infantry range from 0 to 2 pierce armor for the spear line depending on upgrades, increased by 1 to 2 for the long swordsman, up to a high end of 5 for the Gulam and Eagle Warrior with all upgrades. In contrast, the Huskarl in Castle Age alone can go as high as 8. In Imperial Age, that's then extended even more to 10, which is 2 higher than the elite Gulam, Mayan or Aztec Eagle Warrior, or even the elite Skirmisher. Their pierce armor really is almost unprecedented for a non-siege unit other than the Inca elite Eagle Warrior. In practice, that means where Goth longswords take 15 arrows and an Eagle Warrior and Gulam effectively double that to 28 and 30 crossbow shots respectively, the Huskarl then doubles that again to 60, with their bonus damage thrown in for good measure. Generally, against ranged units, they're just a brick wall, with a couple of exceptions who break through them with either a raw number of projectiles, bonus damage, or the Armenian composite bowman, which ignores pierce armor altogether. The other implication of all of this is that Huskarls make for incredible raiding units, taking 4 times the number of town center arrows as a Goth longsword, with each town center arrow doing just 1 damage. On the flip side, against castles, they're obviously better than most infantry, but maybe by not as much as you'd think, tanking just double the number of arrows as a longsword. The reason is just that the castle's high attack makes it less sensitive to differences in pierce armor, which is something we could also say about gunpowder units as well. Now so far, they're looking maybe a little broken, being cheap, fast, easily trained, and standing out among even the other high pierce armor infantry units, but things are going to take a slight turn now as we switch to melee. Notice that Huskarls have no melee armor by default, and are, remember, 50% more expensive than Goth longswords for similar looking melee stats, minus the extra speed. It probably won't come as a shock then that Goth longswords dominate head to head with balanced resources as the much more cost efficient option. With that said, I actually think Huskarls are slightly better in melee than they often get credit for. For example, against generic longswords without supplies, you might still be hesitant to use Huskarls, but Huskarls are basically the same unit for the same price, just swapping 1 armor for 1 more attack. Longswords without supplies certainly aren't the best melee units, but it just shows that in a pinch, Huskarls can put up a fight against at least some generic infantry. Likewise, if we value all resources equally, they can trade against pikemen and light cavalry just fine. Again, these aren't the most impressive melee units, but is why I don't think we should completely write off Huskarls just because their Pierce armor isn't coming into play. Of course, I don't want to push this too far, as they certainly can't beat some of the more impressive melee units like Knights for example, so don't get too crazy with them. They then lose one-on-one against many other infantry units, with Eagles being a notable exception thanks to some bonus damage. Altogether though, they just come across well, being a reasonable, if maybe a little below average melee unit in a pinch, but among the best infantry unique units against anything even vaguely archer-ish, or even something like a Scorpion, taking more than double the usual shots that a long swordsman would. The biggest issue is just getting to that first castle, and obviously the popularity of Knights, which you don't want to be fighting directly any more than necessary. This is where a combination of Huskarls and Pikemen can come in though, and remember all Goth infantry receive the same steep discount. For example, while Huskarls lose to Knights, a 50-50 army of Pikes and Huskarls can beat a comparable or even slightly more expensive army of Knights. This is where army positioning and control definitely becomes important, but in a vacuum, this composition at least doesn't outright lose, while as a group also feels somewhat anti-archer, making it a relatively popular pairing. So that's Castle Age, where things are off to a strong start, and now let's move on to where you more commonly see Huskarls, the Imperial Age. Right away, all of your infantry instantly get cheaper, and Imperial Age is also when your economy is usually big enough to start to really make use of their quick creation speed. At the same time, a dark cloud hanging over all of this is that Goths lack the final armor upgrade, which has some implications. To start though with the Elite upgrade itself, it's quite similar in cost to the Two-Handed Swordsman plus Champion upgrades, and if anything, these upgrades really cement the existing differences, with the Champion getting more attack and melee armor in particular, while the Huskarl gains more pierce armor and increases its bonus damage against archers. I should point out that, of course, because of lacking the final armor upgrade as well as gambesons, the Goth Champion is actually terrible against ranged units with just 3 pierce armor, half that of many other champions with gambesons, and paling especially in comparison to the Elite Huskarl's 10 pierce armor. This is then the point that Goth creation speed is also kicked into overdrive. Not only can Huskarls be created at the barracks with those working 20% faster, but you then have conscription for another 33% boost, followed by perfusion, which doubles the work rate of all barracks. Combined, this drops the champion line's base creation speed of 21 seconds per unit and the Huskarl's 16 down to just 6.6 and 5 seconds respectively. Note the Huskarl only falls to 12 seconds at the castle, so late game you want production to shift towards your barracks as much as possible. Also, as a side note in case you're curious, the Huskarl is actually not the fastest created unit in the game. That title goes to the Elite Shotel Warrior, and even the Karambit Warrior snags second place, with Huskarls coming in third. Now let's see how they actually perform though. I mentioned that lack of the final armor upgrade, and while that is in theory a problem against archers, in practice it really isn't. With all upgrades, a Goth Champion for example takes 10 Arbalester shots. Adding in the final armor would bump that up to 14, then increasing to 18 with gambesons. An Aztec Elite Eagle Warrior then nearly doubles that to 30, with the Elite Gulam pushing that up to 35. Elite Huskarls then make them all look silly, taking 70 Arbalester attacks. Even if we increase the Arbalester's damage by 1, or swapped it out with a heavy cavalry archer to get the same effect, it wouldn't even make a difference against Elite Huskarls, who still take that same 70 arrows. Keep in mind that they then add their bonus damage against any type of archer, and quick speed as well, and it's just a tough unit to beat with archers, even without that final armor. Likewise, against defensive buildings, they again put other Goth infantry units to shame, taking almost 6 times the arrows from town centers. Remember, they again have a bit of bonus damage against buildings, increased by Civ bonus, plus access to arson, and left on their own, even a group of 6 Elite Huskarls are a serious threat to a fully garrisoned town center. Now, a really interesting side matchup to touch on quickly is against the Hand Cannoneer. Hand cannons are often the bane of infantry units, given not just their high attack, but an extra plus 10 bonus versus infantry. That bonus isn't negated by armor, but the pierce attack is more than cut in half. Plus, Huskarls have their own bonus in turn against the Hand Cannoneer, making it not clear which one is supposed to counter the other. I fall into the camp that the Hand Cannoneer is still a useful counter though, and for example, the Elite Huskarl survives only 1 extra attack, besides some other comparable units. Huskarls are measurably better than a typical infantry unit in that matchup, certainly, and hand cannoneers have to be extra careful to have some blocking units in front, but they can be one of the better weapons against late-game Goths, and I wouldn't avoid them, as probably one of the only effective ranged units you have. Next though, let's check out how the Elite Huskarl performs in Imperial Age melee situations. This is actually where I'm less impressed with how they perform, at least compared to Castle Age. First off, they lose with equal numbers against generic champions, even without supplies, while costing basically the same, giving a lot of civilizations at least the option of a soft counter. That's pretty much the story right there, as Goth discounted champions are going to be significantly above average in any melee situation for infantry, while the Elite Huskarl is starting to be clearly below average. For a couple of other reference points, Huskarls can beat Halberdiers cost effectively, ending in this case with about half their HP left. That's not terrible, but consider a balanced fight using Goth champions and with 0 losses and about 90% of their HP, just to put things into perspective. I might even pick Goth longswords here over Elite Huskarls, given the choice. As further evidence of the Elite Huskarl's difficulties in melee, they don't even beat Mayan Elite Eagle Warriors. And remember, they have +3 bonus damage here, again helping to put their unimpressive melee stats into perspective. Remember when I said they're underrated in melee? I'd like to clarify that comment was specific to Castle Age. We really don't need to cover every single melee matchup, but just to make a quick point, they also lose to Spanish Hussars with balanced resources, while of course costing gold, making that even worse than it looks. In contrast, Goth champions easily handle this fight, and even regular champions can trade slightly better than 1-for-1. In fact, maybe the real story here is how effective Goth champions are in melee, with Huskarls losing a balanced resources fight to the Cavalier, while Goth champions can take on not just Cavaliers, but even win out against Spanish Paladins, assuming you turn their discount into a corresponding numbers advantage. Obviously, Halberdiers would do even better, but to me this really illustrates how large the gap in melee ability grows between Goth Huskarls and champions in Imperial Age. So to close with some final thoughts, I doubt there's any surprise in how well Huskarls perform as an anti-archer unit. And maybe the only surprise is how broad that definition is, beyond just the obvious foot archers. I don't think every player, for example, would expect an elephant archer to lose one-on-one to a Huskarl. I'll go back to the idea though of how effective it can be to combine Huskarls with another unit like the spear line against cavalry or even the swordsman line to add in a bit of melee cost efficiency. Even the hand cannoneer can be quite a useful tool if someone's trying to counter your Huskarls with infantry. As we've seen, there's so many ways to deal with Huskarls in melee that a good army composition as Goths usually involves Huskarl plus a response to your opponent's counter. It really says a lot about the Huskarl though, that even if it doesn't actually appear in a game, it's one of a handful of unique units that can still have an impact, as even just your opponent knowing it's in your back pocket will often make them think twice before adding in many ranged units. Of course, the dream is to reach the Goth late game and just spam your opponent's base with Huskarls, letting you sit back and enjoy an easy victory. I highly recommend preparing for that point by not just practicing your Goth boom, but also investing in a comfortable chair. If you don't have one, make sure to check out the selection at my newest side hustle, Spirit of the Lawn Chair. My new online business even has a great website thanks to this video's sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace is an all-in-one website platform for entrepreneurs to stand out and succeed online. Whether you're just starting out or managing a growing brand, Squarespace makes it easy to create a great-looking website, engage with your audience, and then sell anything from products to content to time all in one place. Using one of their templates, you can easily customize a website to your preferred aesthetic and then sell your product or services. That could include physical goods or digital content, including access to your own video library, with Squarespace handling the payment side of things so you can focus on the bigger picture. Using the built-in analytic and insight tools, you can then see exactly what's working and what's not, so you can continue to grow and scale your business more effectively. Go to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/spiritofthelaw to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. So that was a look at the Goth Huskarl. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.